Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. This is still kind of amazing to think of an event where you don't see people. You see yourself in the screen, and then sometimes you invite some guests that can hopefully enlighten and enrich your life. And yesterday was our first Learn With Us session, which was I would say was a bit stressful, to be honest, in the beginning. And then when you can see afterwards how many people that actually watched the presentations from our participants, it was very gratifying. We had 258 viewers that was on a webinar, like what you're doing right here, not right now. And then we had 164 on YouTube, not the same people. And then we have still an unaccounted number on LinkedIn and Facebook and INKISH TV. So we estimate that yesterday more than 500 people saw these nice presentations. And I don't know about you, but you can always wonder how many see things like this from end to end. And in this case, the software really talk about you, because 30% of you guys saw everything, and average time was 1 hour and 28 minutes. So I'm excited, and Henrik and I, we have already decided that this is for sure something that we will continue to do, maybe not in a whole week's time, but this is what we are planning to do. The first session, I'm sorry, you shouldn't have logged on, because the first session is with me. I'm going to give you a presentation about the market, because what is the market? What is a print market? And then afterwards, Henrik will take some questions from the chat, and maybe also he will find some questions himself, because who knows, maybe I have not been good enough explaining what I mean. So that is the reason why we're doing this, because we can share in a way that hopefully makes us a little bit more curious on all things that happen. So now I will just click on my presenter screen share, and then I will open my presentations, and then I will take it. Now I can't see anything except my presentation. So hang on for a second here. So now is what is a market? That is the title that I carefully invented myself, and I wouldn't say that it's a very good title, maybe, because what do I mean with this? I've been working with sales for a lot of years, and every time I've been talking to especially salespeople, they always refer to a market price, for example. And I was just like, is market prices at all a term, or is it just something that we think of as an excuse for not reaching our sales target, or not selling at the price that we should, or these kind of things? So that made me think, what is a market actually? And if I refer to, for example, the single currency market, I think that most of us, at least us that lives in Europe, we will consider and think of the euro, which is in a lot of European countries. As you know, we are out of Denmark, we don't have the euro. Swedish people don't have the euro, even though we are members of the European Union. And the single currency has put in a market where the money policy basically have been put into the central banks of Frankfurt, which is like one way of addressing things. I think that Denmark, we have just followed the single currency. So the Danish kroner is following the exchange rates up and down. The Swedes have done it differently. They have a floating currency. So this is just like one market, and which is maybe not the market that you were thinking of when I was talking about market. Another market is the financial market. That is, I think a lot of people see it as something that has good and bad sides to it. But I think if we look at it from most people's perspective, a financial market is the place that makes sure that our retirement funds and pension funds are invested, hopefully carefully, in at least some stocks that will generate some kind of profit, and at the same time help the companies to develop and grow. So this is a very strong market that is very important things. It's also a very vulnerable market because when the market is changing negatively, as we saw or have seen here during the COVID-19 crisis, we see that the values that we have in our houses, the value we have in our pension funds, all the money that is generated for the future is diminishing, right? Then there's also something called the energy market. And that is not, that is not the same as the financial market. It has a lot of things that is combined with energy and with those kind of things as well. But I'm just trying to give you an example. We have the gray market because that is the market where you have unaccounted kind of money. I think there's a lot of people that knows it, because it's like, should you pay full price for a thing when you can have it discounted without the tax? I mean, called black work, right? Or how does that work? So that is also a market. And then we get a little closer to what we work with, the media market. And every time we define a market, we end up in a situation where we have to discuss, does it make sense at all to talk about one print market? And to be honest, I really don't think there is like one print market, because first of all, we have a lot of different sub segments in the market, from textile to printed electronics to commercial print to wide format print to a lot of different segments in the market. So to say there's one market that you want to address as a salesperson or as a printing company is probably not a fair way of judging things, right? So when we talk about the market, it is the reason why I want to talk about this subject is because I find that it's truly important that when you as a printing company are wondering about what market to address, you should really consider that all the markets I've just described, and there's way more. When I was preparing this presentation, I looked at Wikipedia just to get like inspiration for market. I think there was like 30 or 40 different presentations of market, from the gross, the vegetable market to stock market to media market to energy market to every market that we just described. So you can't say there is like one print market. So as a company, I believe it's important that you find a market where you can serve it in a way that makes sense for you and makes sense for your customers. So in short, you can say that market equals opportunities. I think there's a lot of people in the printing industry that sometimes say that we have always served the same audience, we have always served the same people, the same types of customer, and maybe we have a local background, and that's why we have so many difficulties of getting out of that comfort zone. When I started in the printing industry many years ago, it was kind of strange because it was before the internet, it was before globalization, it was before a lot of different things. I always give this example because it was quite funny. I was, I think it's about 20 years ago, I lived in a small city about 100 kilometers away from Copenhagen. And in that city, there was about 40,000 inhabitants. In that city, there was 3 printing companies. And the 3 printing companies, they fought fiercely about the customers. And they were like, it was always like, I was working in one of the printing companies, and we kind of hated all the other people working in the other printing companies because they took away our jobs, they took away our market, and we were way better than those companies, of course, right? Then things grew a little bit because my boss, he was like, okay, we need to develop our company into something bigger. And I wouldn't say that he gave up on competing with the companies in the city, but he got an opportunity to acquire a company in a city that was about 40 kilometers away. And that city, there was about 55,000 people living there. And there was like 7 printing companies in that city. I mean, when I'm saying this today, I think that all of you who have experienced just 20 years ago remember that that was actually the times that time. Many smaller printing companies, and all of them were pretty successful because, I mean, the printer, he was an important person in the local community. So now it was not just about fighting between the three printing companies in our own community. It was also taking market shares from the other city. And then came the competition between different parts of Denmark. Then came the competition between the different countries in Europe. And then globalization really started to take off, where the Chinese, they were the ones that, oh, they take away our market. They steal our customers, and they are so cheap for all the same reasons as we tried to compete against the people that were, just short time before fighting over the same customers in that little city. Right? So when you look at these markets and these opportunities in the market, it's really a question on how to define things. And you can say that the obvious way of looking into a market is obviously to figure out, okay, I want to grow. That was the strategy that my boss did take that. So if you imagine that the darker blue dot in that circle here, that is where we started. Then we expand, and basically we expanded with the full product range to the next city, to the next city, and the graduated color is representing a little bit that, okay, you get maybe a lesser market share, but that didn't mean so much because the total market was bigger. The problem is that when you have that approach to the market, you're also vulnerable because you don't really become a specialist in anything. And where the Chinese and the East Europeans and the Germans and the competition between countries became more and more fierceful, the next thing that happened was that online came, and the online printers, they specialized in all the things that the printing company I used to work for did, but way cheaper. So when the small printing company in the city at that time was very good at postcards and very good at letterheads and very good at envelopes and very good at all the commodity print, a quite big percentage of that market totally disappeared because nobody was really looking into the market and the opportunities. The online printers, however, they just saw that, okay, if we can gang print, if we can produce effectively, if we can market our prices and services in the same kind of broad perspective as you can see here on the screen, then you end up in a situation where the entire market becomes commoditized. And that is where I believe a lot of printing companies over the past 20 years have lost a lot of their revenue because they simply don't have reinvented themselves and found out what to do. One of the very used terms in how to look into how to do in your things is that you talk about vertical. So you start trying to present yourself in different ways and address different market. It could be company like moo.com, the English printing company specialized in business cards. It can be Sieve Print in Germany, who specialized in photo-related products, and you know a lot of these companies. So instead of having an approach to produce and print everything, then you specialize in some of the things that you find important, these kind of things. So this I try to visualize with these different size of bubbles and this same thing. So I call this the less obvious because maybe you noticed that little dot up in the corner. Maybe you didn't. When I showed it to my sons, they didn't see it until the red arrow came there. And that's why I call this the less obvious thing. Because if you can address a market that not so many people have already seen or noticed, it might be a small part of the market, but it might be a very interesting market from a financial perspective. It might also be very interesting because there's less competition. It might also be something where you can specialize in something and become a market leader. You can maybe even become a first mover. And when you have that approach to a market, you often have the chance to grow a market before the competition starts to see it. I think that's sometimes what happened with when you look at the large format printing, that at some point, large format printing was a very, very lucrative business because you had not so many that did it. And I know that, of course, the equipment was way more expensive than it is today. But at that time, it was not really commoditized. It was a specialty. There were printing companies specialized in doing these large format for signs and banners and outdoor and all these kind of things. Today, unfortunately, it is also kind of being commoditized because everybody's got the equipment. And unfortunately, our industry seems to have so high qualities and so little differentiation that the only real differentiator sometimes becomes the price. If you didn't hear the session from my colleague Henrik yesterday, you should see it, because that actually show how important the pricing can be in order to be profitable. Because if you want to go for that little dot in the upper corner, you should really grow it, and you should make money on it. You should do it fast, because if you find your niche and somebody else also finds it, unfortunately, the major important armory in the toolbox is pricing. So that is, in my opinion, extremely important that you get to that point relatively fast. Then, as I said, this is just representing the same thing as I just said before. You can say that you have markets can be horizontal. And I know that if you sometimes go to webinars like this one, or you attend some business classes, I think that we use a lot of words that may not make so much sense. I think that horizontal markets essentially is we do the things that we have always done. We deliver a broad perspective of products and goods, and we take whatever the customers ask for. And on a very short term, that of course makes a lot of sense. The problem is that with more and more specialized equipment and with more and more competition in the market, I'm just saying maybe that isn't the best approach for all printers, at least. And then, of course, it can also be vertical. Vertical is where you take some of the market segments like business cards or 3D print or printed electronics and become a specialist in that vertical. You can obviously combine these things. Because you are a printing company serving the broader market, you can still select a vertical where you say that this is where we want to specialize. So you can have like the cost base is covered maybe by a horizontal market, and then you have a vertical where you can actually go and find something where you can find the niche that you have decided to address. Markets can also be geography. I once worked in a printing company, and I may be exaggerating a little bit, but my then boss, he said to me, there's no reason to drive too far away until we get 100% market share in where we live. I think that is maybe not the way that you should look at it today. But you can also be the very specialist in your region, serving customers, having a high customer service level. You can have a high quality, you can have all the things. And as long as you address the market with a profit that pays for that extra service that you have decided to do, everything is good. And I think that one of the things that you can really learn from this one is that even the biggest online printers today are now looking for partners, like they call it white labels or business partners, because they basically found out that at certain market they can capture this by themselves, and sometimes they need the local specialists to grab that market share and be the ones that have the close contact to the end customers, where they maybe help about what substrate should we use and what design should we use, and all these kind of things that make things important in that perspective. Market can also be demography. I don't think there's a huge market for necessarily for old ladies that I put on this photo here, but I think that it's very important to understand that when I wanted to talk about markets, it was not because there is like one rule for all markets and how you should address the markets. This is more an example on how you can identify a market that is interesting to you. A couple of years ago, because in Sweden, for example, I don't know if they still have it, but a couple of years ago they had like open salary lists, so it was possible to see the income of every household in Sweden. And I think it was maybe 10-15 years ago, there was a magazine where the only way you could subscribe to it was to prove that you had an income over 1 million Swedish kroner, close to 175,000 euros a year. So that was like also a very specific segment. And why this segment, of course, could be interesting is because it creates, a little vibe, because you're special. It's like driving a very expensive car. Maybe it just takes you from A to B, but the image that it represents was similar to the way that the Swedish magazine did. So they were addressing very valuable content. So advertisers and the people saw this as something that, okay, we are in an exclusive club. So demography, geography, different segments in the markets, the way that you should think about how to get these things can be an extremely important thing for you if you want to differentiate yourself in the future. And of course, one of the final questions is whatever market you address, the real question is, of course, how you conquer your customers. I think that this photo is quite funny. I haven't heard these two gentlemen playing their accordions. I'm pretty sure that they are average, but I'm also pretty sure that by having these horse heads on, I'm pretty sure that they have got attention for more people. And I think that whatever market you want to address, I think the thing is that is really important is that you figure out how to market yourself, market your services, and be sure that you get in touch with the people in the market that you have defined. And that is, I'm not recommending every printer to wear a horse head. I'm just saying that this might be a good thing. One of my very good friends and supporters of INKISH during all the years is Deborah Korn from Print Media Center. And as you know, she is the lady with the antennas, right? And every time I just mention that she's the lady with antennas, even people that don't know her recognize her immediately. And she once said to me, it's not because I really want to be like addressing and be famous and be like sticking out in that sense, but that is the way I can market myself in a way where people will always recognize me and the thing that she does, right? So I just think it's a very funny way of doing things. I just think it's a very important way of doing it, because if you look at most printing companies today, we are not very good marketing our services, to be honest. So I think that is something that define the market and define how you want to address the market. That is hopefully some of the thing that is really important. I think this is the second last slide. So this is about the commodity versus the speciality. I think that is one thing that is very important to remember. If you continue to believe that you want a market approach where you want to address everybody's need in the market, which is essentially what commodity is, then you have to sell a lot. So you have your strategy around how to get that market needs to be addressed about volume and quantity. And speciality, that is addressed by having a high margin product typically, and is by having a market that is way smaller and that requires a lot of more effort to get those customers. On Thursday, I am having a little speech here or session here on Learn With Us about sales. And we will talk a little bit about how to address these two different markets, because both of them are very interesting. I would just say to you that if you go for the commodity and you go for a volume market, I think that it requires a lot of money to invest both in marketing and equipment and workflow and speciality is maybe something where it requires a little bit more. I wouldn't say not thinking, because that sounds that you don't have to think about commodity thing, which you do, of course. I would just about to say that with the speciality, maybe you already have the equipment, maybe you have the people, maybe it's more figuring out what you can do with your equipment and find a market where you can really shine and do something that is different from most. The final note here is that what I've said is just an opinion. I just stole that from Richard Askham, who's also a friend and also have a show here on our channel. But you have to make a decision where you want to go. The future of the printing industry, in my opinion, really relies on how you address the market and how you're sure to get into the market where it's very obvious and very clear who you are, what you want to do, and how you should be the winner of tomorrow. So I hope this little lesson here was inspiration for you, and thank you very much for listening to me. I'm back. So it's a little bit kind of strange thing to be your own presenter and your own moderator. So, but I've asked Henrik to see if he has some questions or anything he would like to know before we cancel or end this session here. So, Henrik, what do you think? He's not online yet. Okay, now he's coming online.
So, thank you for the presentation, Morten. I'm thinking that this non-obvious market is really interesting to dig into. Could you elaborate a little bit on this non-obvious? Try to give some examples.
Sure. I think that that when you look at the non-obvious markets, sounds not so good. I can see Angelo is saying, if you don't hold a key. Okay, that's a question. Can you hear us now, Angelo? You can just thumbs up or something like that. I think it's because Henrik and I'm sitting in the same room. So, okay, it's Henrik. We can't hear Henrik. Okay, Henrik, I just turned off your microphone. Just turn on again. I was just afraid because we're sitting next to each other. Okay. So, Henrik, you asked to repeat the question. Please do that.
Well, I was intrigued by the presentation about the non-obvious market. I think that this market is also interesting perspectives.
Tror du muted din mikrofon? Tror du muted din mikrofon?
Hello? Okay, so I think now that I'm on, I'm sorry for that. I was intrigued about the non-obvious markets, and maybe we could give them some examples and elaborate a little bit further on the non-obvious markets, because I think that one of the things that is interesting about this is that it could be some of the future potential markets.
I think you still don't have any sound, Henrik. I'm sorry. Okay, let me repeat his question. He's asking whether we have any examples of the non-obvious markets that I spoke about. And let me, this is of course a little bit difficult, because one thing is, again, what you think of. Because if you think of the market as non-obvious, it's because it's not obvious. So if I elaborate on it and I had the golden idea for this one, everybody else could probably come up with the same idea. And if I did have the good idea and I just gave it to you and people think it's great, in seconds it could become a commodity market. I think that what is very important is that every time you look at, I think that actually COVID-19 has been a great example on some of the things that could be non-obvious. Maybe too many are now producing face shields and face masks and all these kind of things, because it started as something where you could do something that was really, everything is of course good for the communities and in the health situation. But on the other hand, now it started to be like, yeah, we want to be part of the wave, and we should make money on this, and everybody's like that. So that is an example that it was like a non-obvious market that turned into more like an obvious market today, because everybody needs these protection things, right? I think that the most important thing about the non-obvious markets, and what we have also seen here in the COVID-19, is the opportunity to grab the moment. I don't think that we are particularly good at it compared to anybody else, but what we have done as a non-obvious market, we couldn't travel. So what could we do? Okay, we could invest in some software, do the webinars. We could do all the Skype as we did the past couple of weeks. So we kind of invented something that was non-obvious for INKISH, because INKISH normally goes out and make films from trade shows and from printing companies, etc. like that. For printers, I think the very important thing is to figure out what to do that is really interesting. I have on multiple occasions given an example about a printing company I visited in Lithuania. I think it's almost 10 years ago. It was a couple. They basically produced print products out of the garage. He used to be in the oil industry in Russia. And then he and his wife was a little bit sad about his traveling and never be home. So they decided to say, okay, we buy an old letterpress. So they bought 2 old letterpress machines. And today they are one of the most recognized letterpress printing companies in the world. And they do, you know, the most beautiful invitations and cards for, I saw one that was like, I think it was like 6, 7 colors with embossing and debossing and foils, and it just looked awesome. And I asked them, so what was the price on a project like that? Yeah, we sold 100 invitations to that was a wedding invitation to a couple in New York, and they paid more than $1,500 for 100 pieces. So that is like the non-obvious, because of course I never think that letterpress printing again will be a commodity. But it's an example how you grab a moment of time and turn it into something. If everybody was doing that letterpress invitations, it would probably be commoditized, and it would probably not be so excited anyway, right? Just an example.
Right. I think that my microphone works this time as well. Can you hear me? Good. One other question is, when we talk about markets, are there existing markets where individualized, for instance, print could be a new option for expanding into a market, or do you see other areas where printers might expand?
I know that you are very fancy because you just got in birthday present printed chocolate with I was just about to say that it was a pretty print of your own head, but it was actually your daughter's head, right? Or your kid's heads, right? So I personalized print has been an issue for. You still have problems, Henrik? No, he was asking if I think that personalized print could be something for the future. And to be honest, personalized print has been around for a while in many different applications, from t-shirts to chocolate to personalized print. And I think that a lot of vendors these days talks about mass customization. And to be honest, I think it's like, you know, when the Coca-Cola came with the names on it, right? I think it was kind of a great kind of funny thing to do. But to think that personalization saved Coca-Cola or saved the printing industry would be an exaggeration, both of it. It was a gimmick. It definitely served a purpose, but I'm not sure that it has like a long-term kind of life to it. I think that when you do products and services that should really stick out and be the non-obvious, if you want to take that path, I think it's very important that you find something that is less dependent on a specific technology, but more based on customer demands, and where you find customers are interested in things that are really powerful, as maybe not as communication, but just as funny things, right? Andreas Weber yesterday gave an example from this instant where Fujifilm and this Dutch company was given an example of how these selfie Polaroid cameras are now the new thing. And I think that's a great example of something that is, I mean, probably doesn't have a commercial value for others than Fujifilm and Instant, but great idea, and because they also had the size, they could execute it, or even on a large scale. I was a bit surprised. My own daughter had it for her birthday, Christmas gift wish last year, and when I bought it to her, it was just like. And then I asked her a couple of weeks ago, do you use it? And no, she doesn't. Anybody else, Henrik? Anything else? Angelo is writing something. If you don't hold a key workflow data management, you specifically quite soon turn into commodity. Read, your small dots get discovered and get duplicated. That's right, Angelo. And that, I guess, is one of the ever recurring things. We have made a film with the Swedish Federation where I think I will just find it and share the link with you. Hang on a second here, because The Swedish Federation did a couple of years ago. They did a very interesting film about who makes money in the printing industry. And I have the link here. You should see that. I think it's a very valuable film because from it puts in a statistical way, it shows how much value a large format printer at that time, and they compared 7 years of books with I think it was 2,000 or 3,000 companies. And I spoke to the guy from Bisnote who did the analysis of this one, and he said to me, we haven't done this in all over Europe, but I'm pretty sure that the tendencies are the same. So this is an example on where you can see the value creation, and the hotspot in relation to the non-obvious products is obviously to find where can you find a niche that is big enough for you to invest in and small enough not to be captured by the entire market too soon. Right? I think unfortunately the large format printing companies, they were in a hotspot where they made a lot of money and created a lot of value to their shareholders. I don't think that is the case anymore. That has become a very commoditized market, especially because also some of the online printers are offering some of these services at very low prices. So just my opinion. Well, thank you very much for the session here. The next session is with Intergraph. So they are going to give a presentation about legislation about environmental things. So I look personally very much forward to it, not because I have a deep interest in legislation in general, but I have a deep passion and interest in what Intergraph does, because maybe you don't know, but as an umbrella organization for all the federations in Europe, they represent 106 or 112,000 printing companies. And it's more than 600,000 employees of Europe that are directly or indirectly influenced by the work of Intergraph and the legislation of the European Union. So I think it would be very interesting to hear more about how they work. And yeah, so stay tuned. It's in 10 minutes from now. So thank you for listening into my session here, and see you soon.